Dan, welcome to the podcast.
How you doing? Thanks for having me.
Doing very well. Really excited to have you on. I've been following you on social media for a bit and always intrigued to see what you're up to and your fantastic studio there, which we'll get into. So sure. Let's give the audience the state of the state. What's going on today? What's the broad overview, and who are you as, producer, engineer, et cetera? And tell us a little bit about that.
Well, my name's Dan Malsch. I have a recording studio in Pennsylvania, the Poconos, which is on the East Coast, very, very close to New Jersey border, about an hour outside of Manhattan, hour and 15 minutes, maybe. Seems like I work with a lot of hard rock bands these days. I enjoy mostly every style of music, but seems like I get a lot of calls for hard rock and metal. Past few years, I've worked with a band called Ghost, Avenged Sevenfold recently, band Gojira a little bit before that. I'm in the middle of working on a new Bowling for Soup project as we speak. One of my favorite bands, great guys. I've also been working with everyone knows the famous mixer Andy Wallace for about the past 6 years. So I've had the great experience with Andy, and that's it. I'm very busy. I work every day in the studio. It seems like 7 days a week, luckily. And it's interesting because I'm what would be considered, I guess, a secondary market, probably, an hour outside of Manhattan. And I've been able to keep quite busy for the past 25 years in the studio.
That's fantastic. Well, let's dig into the past a little bit and kind of trace how all of this is connected and what's led up to this. Where were you raised? Where were you born?
So I was born in Brooklyn, New York. You could probably hear the accent. My wife says I can't get rid of it.
A little bit.
A little bit, I haven't lived there in a long time. I was born in Brooklyn, New York. Then we moved to Queens briefly. I lived in Long Island for a while, up until about fourth grade. And then my parents had bought a house in the Poconos, where my studio is now. So their house is probably about 7 or 8 miles from where my studio is now. And then I actually moved back to Long Island in high school, my senior year in high school, to join a band that I was in for about 15 years. So I spent a lot of time in New York. That's probably why I can't shake the accent.
And growing up, were your parents into music or supportive of music?
My parents were always very supportive of music. My 2 older brothers had a band. They're quite a bit older than me. So I was always watching them playing in the garage and playing local shows. So my parents were both very supportive, but it was me watching my older brothers is how I got into this.
And you're a guitar player, is that right?
Yeah.
And if I'm correct, one of your early bands was called Wicked Mariah.
Yes. My cousins had a band. We're basically all related in the band except the drummer. It's like the Partridge Family, the metal Partridge Family. But the guitar player that they had quit the band in a senior in high school. And they called me up. I'm a little bit younger than they are. And they asked if I'd like to join the band. I was not a good guitarist at all. I was many levels down as far as a musician from where the guys in the band were. And I said, like I say to everything, yeah, of course I could do it. No problem. That's how I live my life. I just say I could do it, and then I figure it out after the fact. So my parents actually let me move to New York in high school, and I joined the band and quickly figured out how to play this really hard progressive metal that, it's just hours and hours and hours of rehearsing to try to get up to the level where the band was at. And then from there, we toured around the country and toured in Europe a few times and got the bug.
How far away was Long Island from where you were? I assume you were in the Poconos then?
Yeah.
Okay.
About 2.5 hours.
Where did you live?
I lived in my cousin, who was a bass player in the band. I lived in their basement.
All right. So a little bit of a familial connection there.
Yes. But it was interesting because I went from this little tiny school that we have in the Poconos in high school to this big school in New York. So it was quite a little bit of a culture shock for me. We live in a small town. It's grown now. It's much bigger now. But it was a little tiny school with, not a lot of kids to this totally different environment.
And this is the parent in me asking this question. Like, was there an adult in the household there?
Yes. Okay. Yes. My uncle. So it wasn't as, he's quite a character. So I'm not sure if he was an adult at the time, even though he was about 50. But
Okay.
but yes, there was adult supervision.
Wow, that's a leap of faith on your parents' part to just say, "Oh yeah, you want to go to high school 2 hours away and not be around." And
Yeah, I think back to it now. My mother's very creative. She's just a very creative, open, yeah, Danny, you could do anything you want. Yeah, yes, which is mostly good, that's kind of how I live my life. I just always say yes. I always take a leap of faith, and I just figure it out. Sometimes you stumble, and then you just figure it out.
now, Wicked Mariah, was that the band that led to a record deal for you?
Yeah. We actually got really lucky. It's interesting. I'll give you the quick story. We were playing a lot around the New York scene. We really were doing pretty well. We played a lot in Manhattan. There was like Don Hills was around for a while. It was a nice club in Manhattan. We'd play there very often. A bunch of clubs in Long Island. So we played a lot. And we were originally getting looked at by Atlantic Records for quite a while. That kind of fell apart. The A&R guy person left. He was looking at us for what seemed like about a year. He left, so of course we were devastated. Then we got a call from this metal label in Germany called Mausoleum, which we were unfamiliar. We didn't know anything about the label. Our manager didn't know anything about the label, and we kind of ignored it for a while because we didn't really know anything about it. They actually left a message on our manager's answering machine, and we probably took weeks before we got back to him. But it turned out it was the real deal. They brought us over to Germany to record. We recorded a studio in Frankfurt called Dolphin Studio and a studio in Saarbrücken, Germany. About a month in the studio, they brought over the producer Jim Morris, who owned Morris Sound Studio in Tampa, which is a very famous death metal recording studio, Jim and Tom Morris. And we've been working with Jim Morris a while before that. He helped us record our demos, and so they brought Jim over to the studio. They gave us about a month of studio time, treated us really well, and we got to do 2 records on that label. And they gave us tour support. We went on a tour in maybe '94 with the band Metal Church in Germany. It was actually a great tour at that time. It was really good. And then we toured a bunch in the States. We toured with Yngwie Malmsteen for quite a while. And he was great to us. There's horror stories sometimes about touring with Yngwie, but he was great to us. He treated us really well. We toured with Widowmaker, which is Dee Schneider's band from Twisted Sister.
Oh, yeah.
Bunch of like Rat for a while, a bunch of those kind of bands. So we definitely spent a lot of time on the road. That's kind of what I did on my first half of my career.
And was that experience in Wicked Mariah and working in studios, was that your initial experience to recording studios? Or were there any other, situations prior to that where you got exposure to studios?
I definitely got exposure to smaller studios in Long Island because we were always recording demos, always trying to record and make new songs. But it was interesting because I was always much more interested in that side, in the technical side of being in a band. Like when I was watching Jim Morris mixing and tracking our songs, I was always paying attention. I would actually ask Jim if I could do recalls on the SSL. I was like, can I help you with that recall? Which was like, he's like, oh, okay. So I was, it was and I was always looking at the equipment, studying the equipment, even though I didn't know much about it at all. And I remember talking to Jim Morris, our producer, on the phone and saying, I really want to get into recording. And I believe Full Sail was just getting started in Florida, I believe. And I said, Jim, I'm thinking about going to Full Sail. And what Jim had suggested to me is, he knew how I worked and he knew, I'm not really the school type. I'm a little more, I don't know how you explain it. He's like, I would just buy some, inexpensive equipment and start working with some bands. And that's what I did. I bought, whatever was available at the time. I think it might have been early ADATs. I think at the time, I had 4 tracks before that and everything.
Are we talking like early 90s?
Early 90s, yeah.
Yeah.
So early ADATs, eat the tapes all the time. I think my first real studio was 3 ADATs, a Mackie 32.8. I think that's what it was called. It's 32 channel Mackie board. It was in my parents' basement. And I believe the Mackie board got automation at one time, which was just a little VCA automation. Do you remember that thing?
Yeah, yeah.
That little.
And did it plug into the inserts?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. Yeah, I actually made some, even though I don't think I knew what I was doing, I made some good sounding records on that. You know, I was just kind of figuring it out. Some bad sounding ones too. But
Right, because in those days, and I've encountered that too, you know, like Trident board and some ADATs, like I listen back to that stuff. I'm like, maybe it was just the simplicity and not the overdoing of everything that made some of those records actually sound decent.
I think so. And we didn't have a lot of options. I mean, what did we have? One compressor? I think the only compressor. No, I'm sorry. I think I had Alesis had a stereo compressor at the time. I can't remember. It was a black compressor that everyone had. I think I had that. And I think I sprung for and saved money to get an ADL 1000. Which was
Anthony DeMaria?
Yeah, which I have a lot of his gear to this day. But I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. So I basically had one tube compressor that I would use on everything, you know, whatever basic. I think I was recording Cubase at that time. I think before ADATs, I think I was recording in Cubase. Or maybe the Cubase was after ADATs. I don't remember. But
right.
Yeah.
A lot of lessons learned in that time period, I'm sure.
Tons. A lot of mistakes.
You know, when we're talking in that time frame, you know, how are you surviving? I mean, was there enough money coming in from Wicked Mariah that
No, we'd all work construction. That was kind of, luckily my older brothers owned a construction company, and the guys in the band, my two cousins, Michael and John, the relation somehow owned a construction company. So we were always laborers at a construction company when we weren't with the band.
Yeah.
We didn't make any money. No, I mean, any money that we made went to touring. And most of the time touring, we would sleep in the van. We had a Ford Econoline.
Oh yeah.
You know, the one with the three rows of seats. We'd be sleeping in the van. We would sometimes get one hotel room and share it with us. There was 5 of us. And sometimes we had a sound guy. So we'd pay the sound guy. The money went to the sound guy. And sometimes we would have a guy who would do some guitar teching for us. That's when we were, you know, doing well, making probably $500 a show, you know. So the money would go to the sound guy and gas and, you know, guitar tech who worked probably for next to nothing. We didn't make any money for 10 years.
Was there a transition point for you where you thought, yeah, I'm going to move more into recording?
For sure. Yeah, it was interesting. Like I said, I was always much more interested in the technical side of being in a band. Like I love songwriting, I love producing, but I'm really a sound guy. I'm very interested in how to make sounds and how to, you know, make something sound good. Everything I get, even to these dates, I'm always messing with it. I'm a tweaker. If I buy a new amp, I'm looking at it forever, figuring out why this mid-range sounds like that. So I was always interested way more in the technical side of things. But there was a transition that, and the two, John and Michael, who are my cousins, are still probably a little pissed at me for this. We had got, I know the exact transition. We had got another tour offer for Europe, and it was a cool tour. It was probably with a pretty cool band at the time. And I looked at the tour, and I was actually just building another studio. I had bought a piece of property and was building a studio on that property. So I looked at the tour and I looked at, I got to do all this for the studio. I got to figure out how to get enough money to finish the studio. And at that time, I just said, it was kind of, you know, looking back, maybe it wasn't enough notice to the band, I just stopped it and said, guys, I can't do the tour. Sorry, you know, I'm building the studio. I got, you know, a pretty decent following locally. So I was starting to make a little bit of money with the studio, and I just cut it off. It wasn't a smooth transition. I just cut it off.
So you had been building up business, you know, as an audio pro it sounds like, for a little bit of time there.
Sure. A long time.
I guess you were splitting your time between the band and recording, and clearly the recording started to win out.
Yes.
This studio that you were talking about building, clearly your connections in the construction world, I'm sure, were helpful in that department.
Yeah.
Were you building it in the Poconos, or were you in Long Island?
And the Poconos is
Okay.
interesting because, like you said, having a family in the business, they would buy property, they would buy empty lots. My family would, just know a lot of people in that business. So a lot came up. It was an inexpensive price, wasn't beautiful, needed a lot of work, but I was able to get it, for next to nothing and pay on the lot. So I didn't have the money to come up with. And with my family, my brothers, they all helped me build the studio. So I built it for probably half of what it should have cost me. I'd have to say, being in the construction business, even my new studio, being able to build, because, I basically built this new studio myself. It saved me so much money. It's enabled me to do a lot of things with having that background and not being afraid to do the work. I mean, I'm not afraid to get my hands dirty. I like it, actually.
Yeah, I think that having that knowledge of, how things are constructed, where the materials come from, it demystifies it to you.
Sure.
And you can quickly, draw up plans and
Yep.
say, this is where this is going to go, and then make a few phone calls and, marshal your resources to quickly build, and at rates that, others would pay much more for.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we have the facility we have here now. It's very large. The building's probably about 10,000 square feet. And we built it we bought it as a shell. I mean, it was kind of a disaster when we bought it. So, 20 huge dumpsters later, we emptied out the building, stripped it down to the studs. And I just, for 2 years, spent, because I still had my other studio. I had another studio while I was building this studio, but all in the Poconos, about 7 miles from each other. So I was running that studio and building this one at the same time. So, like I said, what I was able to build this studio for, it would have been unattainable if I would have had to hire a big construction crew and get designers in. Because I know enough about acoustics too. I mean, I've built enough studios. I know how to make it all work. And then recently, we just put up a really big pole barn in the front of the property, and I finished that one also myself. So, I don't know. I spend so much time in the studio. I enjoy getting out there, and I don't know if I want to build anything anymore. I'm kind of getting a little tired of it, but it's really helped.
Yeah, that skill set is just so invaluable.
Yeah.
So the Poconos, I'm assuming, and coming from somebody who lives in Northern California, I bet cost of living and land and like everything else is much more affordable, especially compared to, parts of New York and parts of New Jersey, right?
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
It used to be. It's actually very expensive here. It's changed in the past probably 15 years. I think the county we live in is the first or second highest taxes in all of Pennsylvania. It's crazy. Yeah, it's bizarrely high.
Okay.
I guess because we're the first exit over the Jersey border, it's really hurting a lot of people around here. The school and property taxes are massive.
Wow.
Yeah. So you would think, and it was like that 20 years ago. Now I have a huge building, and I guess if I had that building in Long Island, it would be 3 times the price, but it's quite expensive now.
It snows there, right?
Yes.
Because I have this vague memory of growing up, where I grew up in southern New Mexico. We would get, a bit of West Coast television feeds and a little bit of East Coast. And there used to always be these ads for snowing or skiing in the Poconos.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was always like, where the hell is the Poconos?
Poconos is an interesting place. I mean, we have one, Shawnee, which is a ski resort about 5 miles from us. And Camelback is another bigger one about 10 miles from us. Poconos is actually a really nice place. In the winter, but this time of year, Poconos is really nice. I've been thinking of, for the past couple of years, is buying another place somewhere for the winters. I'm just trying to figure out how to make that happen with my business.
Do bands come to see you less in the winter?
I think I'm always busier in the winter. It's just worked out over the past, seems like 10 years. It's always been locking out a couple months or a month at a time and making a record. And the summer is actually, I'm still very, very busy mixing, but a lot of bands are touring.
Yeah.
The studio is luckily very busy. And it's interesting because I've been thinking and talking to my wife about this, because like the Poconos, that's a tiny market. I mean, there's not a lot of local talent here. There is. I mean, there's a lot of talented people here, but most of my business comes from New York or Philadelphia, or people fly in because I have an apartment in the studio. It's a really nice place for people to come and stay. So it's like a little resort-ish. So it's like a destination for people. But I was talking to my wife, and I wonder, what it would be like to be in a bigger market. Because I don't know. I've never been in a bigger market. I've always had people, I have bands like Avenged Sevenfold coming and staying in the studios for a couple of months. It's interesting how coming to, the Poconos.
Maybe it's just the perfect storm or perfect combination of, geography, space. It sounds like you have a shit ton of space.
It's big. Yeah.
For not only you and your wife, and to understand you have a couple kids, but they're in college, right?
They're in college, yeah. Well, they're now out of college. My daughter lives in Texas, and my son lives in Washington, D.C.
Okay. So, maybe it's just, and maybe your rates, maybe it just works out perfectly.
I think so. I mean, my rates are, I do a lot of records with the guitarist Eric Steckel, and he's coming to the studio in August to do a new record. And he was telling me the rate he paid. I'm not going to mention the name. It's a very famous studio in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't believe what the rate was. My rates are nowhere near that. Maybe you're right. I'm sure that has something to do with it. I couldn't believe what the rates were. I don't know how bands could afford that rate that he was telling me.
Yeah, and then maybe, if you factor in lodging, which you have,
Yep.
the studio,
Yep.
How does it work out in terms of, food? Do they have a place to stay there? Do they just go to the grocery store and bring food back? And
so we're actually in a great location because we're 5 minutes from everything. Where Stroudsburg is the biggest, Main Street in Stroudsburg is actually quite big now.
Okay.
So everything you could want is 5 minutes away from here. But we also have a full kitchen. So bands will just go shopping, and, we have 2 lounges here. We have a big kitchen. We have outside areas for people to eat. So it's kind of it's a destination.
Yeah. And it sounds just like the right combination and right price.
I'm sure the price has a lot to do with it.
Your kids are out of college now. Clearly you had kids some time ago.
Yeah.
And I'm curious how that factored into everything. I guess living in the Poconos, they were brought up there, right?
Yes.
Okay. Family close by.
Yeah. Big, even though I have a German last name, it's a big Italian family. My mom is Italian, so it's just, yes, there's lots of family all over the place.
Okay. So were you as busy back then with the kids being raised there as you are now?
I'm really busy the past 10 years, like crazy busy. But okay. I think I've been busy for a long, long time. And luckily, we had, like you said, we had family to help with the kids, because my wife worked full time. She's retired now. So, yeah. But I was able to schedule things. It's always very important to me to be around my kids. My studio is always very close to my home. I'd bring my kids to the studio a lot of time because we have space here. So it'll always be an extra room for the kids to hang out in. And then obviously when they went to school, it was different. But I always managed my career around my family. It was always making sure that I could be with the kids enough. It was never the career and then the family. It was always the other way around, and it worked out somehow. Maybe I missed out on some things, but I was around for the important stuff.
Was there a point at which you can identify in your past where you realize, wow, I'm now starting to work with bigger bands like Ghost obviously
Yeah.
is not exactly a small band.
Yeah.
Avenged Sevenfold.
Yeah.
Like, what was the point at which you recognized, hey, something's shifting here and I'm growing and I'm working with bigger bands?
It's interesting. I had some really good opportunities early on in my career. Probably opportunities I shouldn't have gotten at the time because I'm not sure how prepared I was for them. I mean, I did a good job, but there's a artist, Doro Pesch from Germany. She's kind of like the metal queen of Germany. She has about 30 albums now. A friend of mine happened to be the bass player in her band. So Doro had come to my studio very early on in my career, and I made a record with Doro early on, very early on. So I think once I did that record, people kind of took me because she was very popular at the time. Still in Europe, she's very popular. I think that gave me a little bit of credibility early on. So then I had bigger bands like Tantric come to the studio, and band Framing Hanley at the time, who was doing really well at the time, pretty early on in my career. But the shift, it's interesting. I think once I started working with Andy Wallace, which is about 6 or 7 years ago, obviously anything Andy works on is, Andy doesn't work on anything at these days. He's getting older, and unless it's, something that he wants to work on, and it also, has to be a certain things for Andy to work on it. So I also think once I started working with Andy, I mean, I had some good success before that, but I think once I started working with Andy, I don't think Ghost would have found me in the Poconos if it wasn't for Andy.
There's a couple through lines here. It seems that, doing a little bit of the work for this German metal queen.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think we all know, those that are listening and you and I, like, you work with one person like that and it tends to trickle down and work its way around. And especially if people have a good experience with you.
Yeah.
So I could see that through line. Tell me about how Andy came into your life and how did he end up working with you?
I'm going to try to make it as condensed as possible.
Oh, take your time.
It's the greatest story in the world, I think. Because I guess if you know Andy, you know how quiet Andy is, and Andy doesn't do interviews. Andy is just, Andy works on his projects and plays with his 100 classic cars. So Andy's not out and about where you'd be able to meet Andy. So a friend of mine, Steve Erdl. Steve's an interesting guy because Steve's family owns a hotel in town. They own a car dealership. They're kind of pretty well connected in the area, but Steve talks to everyone. Steve is just everywhere all the time. He's got a great personality, talks to everyone. So Steve Erdl's brother, owns a hotel. And Andy does a car show every year where they take a bunch of classic cars around and kind of tour certain parts of the country. So it turns out that Andy was staying at my friend Steve's hotel. And Steve, as usual, was talking to everyone. He ended up talking to Andy's wife and just asking, "Oh, what are you guys doing? Why are you guys here?" And this and that. It's like, "Oh, we're doing a car show, and my husband Andy." And she's like, "What does your husband Andy do?" And she said, "He works with bands. Works with a bunch of different bands." And so Steve is also a musician. He asked, "Well, what bands?" It's like, like bands like Linkin Park and like Nirvana. And he's like, "Oh, that Andy Wallace." That's exactly because he knew, because he's in the business. He went to Berkeley. He's a trumpet player. So he immediately calls me, "Dan, you got to get down here." Andy's at the hotel. I'm like, "Andy?" He's like, "Andy Wallace at the hotel." I'm like, my first thing is, I'm not going to bother Andy at a hotel when he's on a car show. That's the last, not knowing Andy, that's the last, I'm not going to do that. So I think Andy was there for probably 3 or 4 days. And Steve kept pestering me about going to talk to Andy. And I kept saying, "No, I'm not going to bother Andy when finally the last night, he's like, "You got to get down here. Andy's leaving tomorrow." I was like, Okay. So it was like 11 o'clock on a rainy night, and Andy was on his car show. They finally got back. I was inside the bar, and Andy comes walking in, his little grocery bags and stuff, just walking in. He's like, "Hey, Andy, this is Dan I was telling you about." So I think Andy was probably tired. It was 11. It's like, "Oh, how you doing?" I
Great.
know.
Nice to meet
Great.
you.
Yeah. You want to have a drink? So yeah. And I just spent an hour just talking to Andy about anything other than music. We didn't talk about music at all. I didn't bring it up. They didn't want to bring it up. And then at the end of the conversation, Andy said, "Oh, I heard you have a studio." And I was like, "Yeah, I do. Yeah, if you ever want to stop by and check it out, let me know." And it turns out Andy only lives about 40 minutes from me. So maybe 6 months goes by, 6 months go by, and I had a call from Andy. He's like, "Hey, I want to come check out your studio." So he just stops by. He walks in. He says, "You have everything I love." Because I have an SSL 4K, and he
Mhm.
pretty much only mixes on. I think he was mixing on a K in New York, but 4K is his favorite console. And he's like, so he's just looking around. He's like, "Oh, maybe I'll call you sometime when I have a project." A couple of months later, calls me, and it was interesting because it was the same time my console was being completely redone. He called me and said, I have a
Mhm.
project," and it was like 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks away, and it was with a band Gojira, which is a big metal band.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and my console is taken apart. We're rebuilding the whole thing, recapping. So I said, "Oh God." And I never say this. I never say I can't do something. I've never said it ever. But I said to Andy this time, I said, which is the dumbest thing in the world. Looking back, I said, I don't think I'll be able to do that." And Andy's exact words to me, "No, I believe you can. I believe you'll get it done." So that's exactly what he said. So he booked
Wow.
it. He's like, "I believe you'll get it done." I said, "Okay." So we got it done. I remember for the night before, I was staying up, even before, just trying to get the computer working and my tech, and that was very stressful. But from then on, Andy's only worked here.
Holy shit.
Yeah, I actually just talked to him a couple of days ago about a new project.
What a stroke of timing and who you know and old friends just doing what old friends do.
It's the strangest thing because sometimes my wife, she likes to bust my chops. She'll say, "Could you imagine if you didn't go that night?" She's like, "I was telling you to go the whole time." And I live my life not to bother people. That's really like, I don't want to be a bother to anyone. But sometimes you have to do that kind of thing.
Opportunities don't present themselves when it's convenient for you.
Mm-mm. They don't.
I mean, everything from, oh, he's doing a car. I don't want to bother him to, the console being torn apart.
No, yeah, it was. I mean, it was very. I think I aged about 5 or 6 years during that little short moment. And it's interesting because not to dwell on this whole Andy thing too much, but I've done so much work with Ghost because of Andy. From doing the first, we did it in Para. I think it was in 22 or 2023, maybe 2022, I think. Then I ended up mixing Ghost's entire catalog in Atmos, because I have an Atmos room too. And just to give you a quick story, if you want to hear it, about what happened
please.
with Skeletor, with the new album. Andy and I work very closely together. We have a really cool relationship of how we work. I do certain things, Andy does certain things. We originally mixed Skeletor for Ghost in 2024, in the summer, August of 2024. And we thought we were done with the record. We had turned it in. Everyone seemed happy. And then in November, I get a call from Tobias's manager, Kristen. "Hey, Dan, how you doing?" No, I got a text. She said, "Dan, I have an idea and it involves you." And my text back was, "I love ideas that involve me." So it's just like, a funny text. So she calls me like 5 minutes later. She's like, "Dan, can you come to Stockholm? I think it was in a week. Can you come to Stockholm? We want to change a few things on the record." It's like, we turned it in. It was mastered a couple times already. I don't know if I should be giving all this away, but I think Tobias has been open about it. So immediately I go to look for a studio with a 4K. There's one studio in Stockholm with a 4K. which was booked because I wanted to be able to take what we did in the studio where we left off on my 4K, bring the floppy disk and recall the console. And that didn't work out. So the 4K studio was not available. So now I'm kind of a little bit in panic mode. We need to find a studio. Because really what happened is Tobias couldn't be in the studio with us in August. So we were going remote a lot, back and forth. Tobias really wanted to be in the studio. It's a super important record. So we booked, the only studio I could find was a studio called Immersive, which had an SSL duality, which is a completely different console.
Very much.
It's night and day. So I immediately called Andy. I don't know if I'm going on too long with this.
No, keep going, man.
Oh, okay. I immediately called Andy, and that's what Andy does. I said, Andy, we can't do any recalls. The only studio I could find has a duality. We can't find a 4K. A duality is not going to recall a floppy disk. It doesn't. It
doesn't work like that.
It doesn't work like that. I wish it did. So Andy said again, he said, you'll figure it out.
Okay, Andy.
Yeah. So actually was a blessing, I have to say, because, and Tobias was awesome. I had gotten to the studio it was a studio Immersive in Stockholm, beautiful duality. I've never worked on a duality at all. So the first song I worked on was a song called Satanized. Now, Andy couldn't be in the studio. Andy was somewhere else. So I'm just me and Tobias in the studio. First song I go to redo is a song called Satanized. Spent about 2 days getting Satanized to sound what I think it should sound like. It was nice because Tobias kept calling me a couple of times, and I think in my voice he could tell I needed more time. He's like, you want me to come by? It's like, I'll just come by tomorrow. You want me to come by? I'll just come by tomorrow, because I was figuring out how to make the duality sound like the 4K. I think actually it's a better console once you figure it out. So I ended up completely remixing the first song. It's just totally different console. There's no way. I mean, the Pro Tool files went over, but we do so much on the console that, all the EQing is pretty much done on the console. And so Tobias walked in and heard Satanize. He's like, ooh, can we do them all like that? That was basically so 10 days turned into almost 3 weeks. So we completely remixed the album on the duality, which I love it. Made me want to buy a duality. I loved it. I loved it after I figured it out. It's a very different console. But it was interesting because that was another thing that I was thrown into. Jet lag, not knowing the studio, completely different monitors. I mix on Atom monitors, which are pretty specific monitors, ribbon tweeter. And they had Genelec, the ones.
Oh, wow.
And
that's a really different.
It's so different. I could not figure them out. And then the studio is beautiful. The room is beautiful. The monitors, if you know those monitors, are great. Luckily, they had a pair of, I guess they're called Audizies headphones.
Yeah.
I think that's Audizy. Those headphones saved me because I just couldn't figure out the speakers. I loved the studio. I loved the staff. My assistant, Besma, was amazing. She knew the console so well. The studio couldn't be nicer, but I just couldn't figure out those monitors. No hate on Genelec. They're great.
Yeah.
I just coming from Atom, old Atom on. I have newer ones now, but I was mixing on the S3As for 20 years. So I was completely confused. But anyway, so it turned out, remixed the whole record, remastered it again, and it went number 1 on Billboard. So
fucking A. Good for you, man. That's awesome.
But it was stressful. Now, I know I went on a long time about it, but it was an interesting.
No, but that's what it is, Yeah. And it's those tests. It's like, okay, they're going to throw a bunch of shit at you, whoever they is.
Yeah.
The people you work with. And you dig in and you make it work. And I think some of the underlying currents that we're not really talking about here that I think are important is, we got to recognize the support of your wife.
Geez.
I mean, that could just.
She's great.
And I would say it goes without saying, but you got to say it because it's a factor. Because if you don't have that foundation at home, it makes it harder. It makes it more stressful because the job is stressful enough as it is because of who you're dealing with and the level at which you're dealing. And I don't want to make this all about Andy Wallace, but I mean, what are the key takeaways from Andy? I mean, What a joy, huh?
Andy is, I don't know how to explain it. He's a great guy. He is so trusting. Like he kind of, I mean, he's been doing it for so long. There's no, I mean, he kind of, especially on the records we work with on together, he lets me do my thing, and then he comes in and does his Andy thing. Like he doesn't watch over my shoulder. He's a joy to work with. He's been doing it for so long. He has I don't think there's any ego in it.
Mm-hmm.
He's very supportive. He's always telling me, yeah, you could do it. Yeah, you can get it done. Yeah. It's like, okay. But what I've picked up on Andy has a lot of confidence, no ego, but a lot of confidence. Andy is very sure about his decisions, but he's also open. I'm surprised how open to feedback Andy is. He is so accommodating and open to revisions and open to feedback. I thought, before working with Andy, the great Andy Wallace would be like, no, it has to be this way. He's completely unlike that. It is the way that when everyone's happy with it, that's the way it should be. He is not it has to be this way.
And clearly he has made smart business decisions over the years because, to have a car collection like that and multiple homes.
Do you know about it?
There's a guy who clearly managed his money well and negotiated well. I can only assume he got, points when it mattered on records, not to get into Andy's business, but I mean, there's something to learn there.
Andy is extremely successful.
Yeah.
I would say that I know a lot of Andy's business because we're pretty close, but Andy is about as successful as you could get. He's made great decisions.
And I assume that that's influenced you in your decision making.
For sure. I mean, I'm sometimes, because I've come up a different way. I've come up with my approach is always worry about making the music great first and then the money secondary. I'm also a good business person, but my approach has always been, if there's a project that I love, I'll do it and then figure out, the finances later on. And sometimes that's bit me in the butt a little bit with not negotiating sometimes contracts properly sometimes. But in the end, it's worked out. Mm-hmm. I'm a lot smarter now. I have a manager now. Not only say that I wasn't smart before, but I would just say yes to everything, as long as I like the project. And then kind of worry about the business side after. Now, luckily, I've had enough success to where that's kind of taken care of. Mm-hmm. But I've had a pretty organic approach to things.
Let me ask you about a couple of aspects of that. So, in terms of little bits of advice you could kind of pass along, just overarching ideas to other audio professionals in terms of business advice. Mm-hmm. Do you have anything to say on that topic?
I do, because it's I guess it's two schools of thought. At least the people I work in the industry, it's been very organic. For instance, if Ghost's manager would have called me and said, "Hey Dan, I need you to do this in a week," and I would have first brought up, well, okay, but first, how much am I getting paid? What's the point situation? But it wouldn't feel right. It needed to be done. I knew there was a lot of stress about it. I knew that the record was really behind. So I just said yes, knowing that it would be worked out. These are good people. It's all gonna be worked out. I'm not the one who's going to first bring up, well, and this maybe sometimes isn't the right approach, but it's worked for me. I'll say yes, and then we'll figure out the particulars later. And I'm not going to be the pain in the ass. I'm not going to be the one who is going to stop something from happening because the money isn't exactly what it should have been. Mm-hmm. Because I said yes, and it turns out to be a massive record. And from doing that record, I've got already so many other projects. So it's kind of, did I miss out on a few dollars? Could be, but I've made it up, You know what I'm trying to say? So I'm not
100%.
It's an organic thing. And it's like, I've had different managers over the years where there's so much like business, oh, Dan can't do this, but this is that. And the manager I have now, he was in a band called Motionless in White, which is like a really popular metal band. His name is Josh Balls, and he's the nicest guy in the world. It's Balz, not B. Yeah, yeah, I know. Everyone laughs about it.
Everybody, I'm sure, just laughed.
It's just, yeah, it's all. But the way Josh handles things, very organic, and it's always. I mean, listen, I'm going to get paid. I get paid well, and I'm not gonna do something at this point in my career if I'm not getting paid enough. But I don't know. I don't know what kind of advice I would give, but I would say business second, and making sure you're the right person for the job first. And it's probably not the greatest advice sometimes, but it's worked out for me. I would say, yes, take care of your contracts, but don't make that the first thing you bring up. Because, I have bands call me all the time, and, this is very interesting. I hope I'm not going on with this forever.
No, I'm enjoying this.
I'm working with a band in California right now where he had said to me, it was kind of shocking. He said, Dan, I've worked with a lot of big mixers, and you're the only one who calls me back. You're the only one who answers my questions. Like, he'll ask me, different reamping questions, this and that. I'll call him right back. I'll get on the phone. I'll answer. And it's surprising. He said, it's usually a manager email calling him back, or it's not as personal. I try to keep stuff very personal. And for me, it doesn't matter if it's Ghost or if it's whoever it may be. It's been my approach forever. And I don't think that'll change.
I think that what you just said is so important. I think that gatekeeping mentality of shielding yourself from whatever is such bullshit.
It's bullshit to me.
I think that artists, they just want to communicate and talk to somebody and go, how does this work? They're not trying to mess you up. You're all on the same team. They're just trying to understand the process so they can make their decisions properly.
Yeah, and you're charging. I don't know if I'm as expensive as the most expensive guy, but I'm not cheap to work with. So I figure if someone's paying me this much money, I should answer their questions, and I should treat them with the respect I think that they deserve. Because if I say yes to the project, that means that I want to do the project. I don't, it doesn't matter if they haven't sold 30 million albums. It doesn't make a difference. It's just, you should treat them when they call. You should call them back. Sometimes people call a crazy amount and you have to, but if someone calls you and says, can you talk? As soon as you're able to talk, or at least text them back and say, I'm in a session. I'll call you as soon as I'm done, or I'll call you in the morning. Communicate with them, because, and this is kind of a random, I know I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent, but I have other engineers that work at the studio, and they say, after this Ghost record and all these other things that have happened over the past years, how does it feel? It does feel, quite honestly, it doesn't feel any different. It just feels like I get up and I try to do a great job every morning, whatever I'm working on. Maybe it should feel different. Maybe I don't, maybe it should feel a little different. But, I know a lot of the engineers ask me, well, what does it feel like to have a number one record? Honestly, I don't know. Maybe I'll know at some point. I have no idea. It just feels like people appreciate what you did, and luckily it worked out. But I didn't wake up feeling any different the next day, or maybe I was younger too. I thought I would, I thought I'd be like, oh, when this finally happens.
But, I'm just trying to analyze it in my brain a bit. Like, maybe it's the result of just kind of being you're not in Los Angeles, you're not in Nashville, you're not in New York, you're not in London. So here you are in the Poconos, and you just kind of have maybe, a pace at which you operate, and just a genuine sincerity to it. And maybe if you live in those other areas, you get caught up in the groupthink of everybody else, and everybody else's manager has you do it this way, or you should do it like this. And, I never call people back, or, and maybe there's just kind of a, I don't know what you'd call it. I don't want to call it, you're not in the Midwest, so you don't have this Midwest kind of thing going, but I don't know. Maybe it's just how you want to be treated. You treat others that way.
I mean, I'm the guy that will go and get coffee for people. Like, like I'm like, you guys want coffee? I'll go down and get it. I wouldn't expect like an assistant engineer. I don't even like using that word, which is I mean, obviously you have assistant engineers, but I don't know. And some of my friends like Steve, who introduced me to Andy, he's always getting on me like, how does it feel? You should be doing this. And like, I don't know, like, I don't know. I mean, you want to be appreciated for what you do and you want to get the credit for what you do.
Uh-huh.
But I have a good life. I was able to put my kids through college doing this.
That's fantastic, man.
I don't know.
And I've talked about this on my show before. There's this YouTube video out there, and I'll see if I can find it, everybody listening or watching, and I'll put it in the show notes. But it's a video with a bunch of actors around a round table, and they're all listening to Robert De Niro kind of give them a little pep talk. And he's talking about how no matter how successful you get, you've got to keep your head straight. You can't get a big ego. You have a big win? Great. Enjoy it for a few seconds, but then just keep moving forward. And you seem to be putting that into practice. I really like that.
I'm trying to, I'm not. I just think that's just how I was brought up. Honestly, I just think, if I was ever that guy, because I've worked with that guy, a bunch of times, I don't like it. I don't, I don't want to be known as that guy, especially. So I think I will actually go out of my way to not be that guy.
I've kind of scanned through some of the other interviews you've done, and I've done a little bit of research. So I'm under the understanding that, okay, so you've got this studio, you've got your home, and this is all in the Poconos, but I'm to understand you're building another studio?
So I had built we put a big pole barn out front of our, right. It's not exactly sure what we're going to do with it. But I do build studios. That's also what I've built about 6 studios for people so far. I just built a really nice one in Manhattan for a client. I built a massive one a couple of years ago in Jersey. It's a massive studio. So from doing all that construction as I was young, kind of a side business that I seemed like I built a studio every couple of years. I built another one in Hershey, PA, fairly recently. But yeah, so on my own property, I am figuring out what to do with the pole barn. Maybe another studio. I'm also thinking of having this massive drum room out there. Just a big, and my wife is the greatest because she'll just, whatever you want to do, Dan. It's always, I got to watch that because I'll keep expanding and expanding and expanding. I have a good Atmos story if you want to hear it about the building.
Oh, well, so you're speaking my language.
I'm always giving away all my secrets, but I don't really care. It is what it is. So I worked on Ghost's album, and I feel like I'm bringing up Ghost a lot, but I work so much with them. It's like I've worked on like 70 of their songs over the past 4 or 5 years. So, So anyway, that's where the Atmos story comes from. So Andy and I worked on the Impera record here. We mixed the stereo version on my 4K. I get a call from Ryan Wally. Hopefully Ryan doesn't hear this at some point. And Ryan said to me, Dan, do you mix in Atmos? And of course, the first thing in my mind is, yes, all the time. I didn't even really know what Atmos was, to be quite honest with you. I mean, I kind of knew what it was. But so, and then his next sentence out of his mouth is, well, can you mix the Ghost album in Atmos? And we need it like, it's like yesterday. Everything is always yesterday. So I was like, yeah, of course, no problem. So luckily I have a Studio B. It's in the upstairs part of the studio. And I have a great tech, Daryl. He's a genius tech. He's a good friend of mine. I said, Daryl, I have to mix this album in Atmos. He's like, what do you mean? You don't have an Atmos studio? So we rigged this Atmos studio. We got like a JBL Intonato. I can't even remember the interface at this point. And I had a bunch of Quested monitors because I had been using Quested monitors for a long time in my old studio. So I had some Quested monitors, I had some Dyne audio monitors, all these different monitors. So my tech is really great. So he hooked up probably in about 2 weeks. He had an Atmos studio going for me in the upstairs Studio B. Then I had to figure out how to mix an album in Atmos. So probably, a week later, week and a half later, I turned in the Atmos mix of the Impera album, and they didn't have one note. They said it's amazing. We love it. Maybe they didn't know what they were listening to, fully. But it's interesting because when I was in Stockholm recently at the studio Immersive, they have a huge Atmos room. So they do like a lot of Dolby comes there and does a lot of events. So when I was at Immersive, Besma, who was assistant there, brought me down. The Dolby guys were doing a demonstration. And they asked me, what are you working on upstairs? And I said, I'm working on Ghost. And they said, Ghost? Did you mix Call Me Little Sunshine? I was like, yeah, I mixed that in Atmos. Like, we used it as a rock demo. That was the first thing I ever mixed in Atmos, in that rigged up studio. How weird is that?
It is weird, but it goes a little bit back to my earlier comment about the Mackie board and the ADATs.
Yeah.
It's like the simplicity. It's just like, do no harm. Just like get it on there.
Yeah.
Make it sound good, and then stop messing about.
Yeah. I'm giving away all my secrets, but what are you going to do?
Well, that's pretty brilliant. How much Atmos work are you doing these days?
I probably mix a couple songs a week. It's not enough. It's not enough to only have my Studio B for an Atmos room. So probably 2 days a week, sometimes 1 day a week mixing Atmos, and the rest of the time just tracking in stereo and doing stereo mixes.
And not to ping pong around here, but
yeah.
You're mixing on a 4K, and did you ever find yourself mixing in the box or downsizing in any way, or do you think that you kind of gravitated towards that because you've got the space to do so?
Yeah, I mean, I'm 80% still on the SSL. Mm-hmm. I do have 32 channels of Orbit Neve summing mixer, which I do use sometimes if I have a mix on the console that I can't touch and I'm waiting for approval and I have to mix another song. I'll mix on the Orbits, which I love. But I'm very much on the console, and I have it down to a science to where, I'm not doing as much EQ on the console and compression as I used to because of recalls. So I have it where I could recall a song in 10 minutes, and my console is very well maintained. So when the line amps go back, they go back. But I am thinking, quite honestly, about a newer console, an SSL console. I'm not sold on the Origin, not Origin. I think it's called the Origin.
Yeah.
No,
the SSL Origin.
No recall and no compression on the channels. To me, it's a big part of the SSL is compression on the channel. How I EQ into compression.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking about the Duality. Very expensive console. I'm a console guy still. I know it seems a little archaic at this point, but it's just kind of what I'm used to doing. My wife's like, "Yeah, sure, get it." Because when I left Immersive, luckily, like I said, my wife just says, because she thinks I'll figure everything out. Of course, she's like, "Yeah, just get it. Yeah, you should get that." Yeah.
Is that not going to screw up the workflow with Andy a bit?
Well, that's one of the reasons why the 4K is staying for so long. But Andy, at this point, I think whatever I want to do, he'll adapt to. I mean, I know Andy's still going to do records. I don't know how how often he's going to, but the speed in which you have to work these days with recall, it's tough. That's why I have the summing off to the side, because I won't mix completely in the box.
You got a workflow that's been working for many years.
Yeah. And people do great mixes in the box. Like, that's not something that I've heard great, unbelievably great. It's not like one's better than the other, just that how I'm used to working. But I'm kind of set with how I work.
God, Dan, this has been great. I really, really have enjoyed talking with you, and I bet the audience has really enjoyed hearing from you. Obviously, audience, as usual, all things pertinent to this discussion will be in the show notes and websites and all that crap. So, well, Dan, thanks again. Thanks for making time for me. And yeah, I'm sure we'll talk again.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. It's a great show. Great host. I appreciate you taking the time to all my random stories,
I've enjoyed it immensely. So
Great.
thank
I
you.
appreciate it.
All right, Dan, take care.
Take it easy.